Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Ogden here at CU Times. I am very excited to have a very important conversation with our dear friend Henry Meier Esquire, out of New York. Henry runs his law practice out there, a credit union attorney, very smart person, and was really the first person I reached out to once the decision came down this morning from the Supreme Court concerning Trump v. Slaughter. Henry, your first thoughts. Let's just open it up that way.
Once again, Michael, thank you very much for having me on and inviting me to talk. Um, big takeaways. Let's start with the most practical things for credit unions, which are one, the litigation, Harper and Otsuka litigation, in which they were seeking to get their board positions back. That case was effectively on hold until this decision was decided. And based on the court's decision in Slaughter today, I don't see any viable argument. I don't think it's very realistic to think that they will ever be getting their seats back. In other words, that decision stands at the very least the proposition that, in most circumstances, with the exception of the Federal Reserve, which you can get into, the president will typically have the ability to remove, um, uh, without cause,
Mhm.
the heads of what we used to call independent agencies. So that's the first most practical thing. Now, the interesting thing about that decision is one of the themes throughout the decision is that even though the president has the ability to remove people, board heads for any reason,
Mhm.
the ability to confirm is still with the Senate. So on a practical level, the way I think this is going to play out, based on this ruling, if I'm in the Trump administration and I think I might lose the Senate this year, you don't need to get political. Let's say it's a possibility.
Mhm.
Then there's a real practical impetus on their part to get as many of these board seats filled as possible. And it's important for people on the NCUA to understand that this is not just happening with the NCUA board. This is happening
Yeah.
to dozens of of seemingly previously independent agencies. So, second thing I think you say is, I think you will see a rush to fill the vacancies, not only to fill the Kyle seat, the Kyle Hunter seat right now, but in other way, the other two vacancies as well. And I think you'll see a rush to get that done before before January of next year, when you might have a new Senate Democrats in charge. Third thing is
Mhm.
that because of the way in which this was interpreted, and because of the way in which the president has, or either party has the ability to do this, I do think that if you look down the road, it does mean that we're in for another period of really what I call um, extreme whiplash compliance. Because today we have President Trump, and I say this all the time with you, 2 years from now, who's to say we won't have a president Ocasio Cortez or someone of that ilk,
Mhm.
and they would come in and they would immediately undo so much of what this small group of people on this board has done.
Mhm.
So, two practical things, which is you're going to have a board of obviously conservative people, which is going to be good for the credit union movement in the short term. Second thing is you're going to not get their Chairman Harper and board member Suka will never be back in the board most likely. And third thing is you're going to end up with a situation where over time you're going to have to constantly be hedging your compliance in terms of how do I satisfy the current group in charge while anticipating what might be happening down the road.
Mhm. I will say you're the second person who's used the term whiplash compliance that I've spoken with today. The other was Ann Petros at
Uh,
America's Credit Unions. Actually, Evan Weinberger, a really great reporter with Bloomberg Law, and myself were having a conversation with Ann about it, and she brought up the same thing. In fact, I will say, Henry, I wanted to ask you about this. I asked Ann about kind of the historical um, reference point, if there is one, she for the decision in this case, and she was thinking about it like this is as important as the seal of law, uh, concerning CFPB.
well, absolutely. This goes beyond serial law because, again, keeping it with the credit union context,
Please.
let's put out the scope a little first. Okay,
Yeah.
this is one of the most enormous transfers of power from an executive to an executive branch to the executive branch from Congress in really the history of the country. And that's not an exaggeration because even if you agree with the rationale behind the court's decision, Justice Kagan had pointed out that none of these agencies would have been created had they thought the end result was they were handing all these new agencies and new heads to the executive branch.
Hmm.
So you have more than 100 years of this huge administrative state being created. And then you have the Supreme Court saying, oh, you guys got that all wrong when you thought Congress could steal this from the president's direct oversight.
Hmm.
All these agencies are actually run by the president pursuant to the Constitution.
Yep.
So, first of all, you have enormous transfer of power, whether you agree with it or not. Second thing is, serial law just applied, and it just is funny, but just applied to the CFPB. And at the
Yep.
time, it said, okay, we're going to say this. But now look at what they've done. One of the things they do in the decision is talk about the enormous power the FTC has. Well, all that power now goes to a president appointee. So I agree, this is bigger than that. I'm not exact. I don't think this is hyperbole. This has to be put in the context of one of the great important decisions of all time. I actually think it's analogous when you go back historically to the old cases which predate the Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and his movement to make the court more liberal. I actually think it goes back to that pre-era where the court was still doing so much to say, hey, you don't have the authority, President,
Yeah.
to do everything you're doing. Now they're saying, hey, President, you do have the authority much more than you thought.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just as significant, but in the other direction.
It is truly an amazing day, and we've been preparing for this for quite some time.
You and
And
I have talked about it a lot.
we've talked about it a ton over the past year since this all went down in April of 2025. And I do want to ask you a couple of questions. I don't want to keep you all day because we will talk about this for 5 hours if we're allowed.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you really specifically going forward, what you feel like and what you're seeing from your legal perspective, what this truly means, not only for NCUA, but for really anytime a president disagrees with an agency, its board members or even members, that have years remaining in their terms, allegedly. I mean, does that mean anything anymore? Like, I'm appointed to a 4-year term. Does that mean anything?
The only practical impact it's going to have, and again, let's play this out.
Okay.
If right now we're taking for granted that we have a Republican president and a Republican Senate.
Yep.
The only way the president isn't going to have the power, a future president is going to have exactly the type of power you're talking about. Let's say 4 years down the road, you have a board member on NCUA who says, you know what, I think I agree with an expansive view of membership of the NCUA board's right to create an expansive view, a membership field, even more expansive than we have now. Okay, and the president says, well, that really isn't consistent with what I think how the laws should be interpreted. If he has a Republican Congress and he's a Republican president, he's just going to do away with that person.
Hmm.
But if there was a split in government, if you have a Democratic controlled Senate, okay, and a Republican president, he better watch out because given the amount of partisanship we're seeing, which I think is only going to increase, the nomination process, even for less high profile positions such as the NCUA, might even become more contentious when you have a split in government, because that's going to be the only effective means that the party that doesn't have the presidency is going to have to have any control indirectly over what the agency does.
Hmm.
So that's where I see the big thing. But assuming you have a situation where you have a Republican president, Republican Congress, then then there's going to be tremendous. Well, let me back up a little. You're right
Yeah.
at the end of the day that whoever the president is now is going to have a tremendous amount of indirect influence over the board. And I don't think you're going to see many situations where a board member bucks the president precisely because of what we're talking about.
Hmm.
The only effective way I see a difference with that is in those situations where you have a split in government and he can't necessarily be assured of getting his nominee or a new nominee through through the Senate. So that's really the only effective way I see the Congress of being able to control this at all. Now,
Okay.
if I could talk about it real quick, we also had the companion decision in the court dealing with in the Cook case dealing with the appointment
Please. Yeah.
of the Federal Reserve member who, to give everyone a little background on this, the board member in question was appointed by President was appointed by President Biden.
Hmm.
The Trump administration said she had to be removed because we have uncovered evidence that she may have committed mortgage fraud by lying on a second application for a second home.
Right.
So what they did was they sent out a one sentence email basically saying, based on what we now know you've done, you're gone.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Now she said, boom, I'm going to sue you on that because you can only remove me for cause. And by the way, the Federal Reserve is independent, so you don't even have
Yeah.
the authority to do that.
Yeah.
So what I think is going to be one of the real interesting outcomes of the day is having read that case, the court actually said that the president may have the ability to remove her after all. But we don't know precisely, we don't have enough evidence at this point. We don't have a record to base this on. All we know for sure is that whatever that standard is, the president, she wasn't given the notice and opportunity to respond
Hmm.
that any level of cause dictates.
Yeah.
Therefore, if I'm in the Trump administration, they're deciding right now, okay, does this mean we're going to go forward with this, a new attempt at removing her, but put more on the record, and then we can have so basically that decision is interesting to me because it didn't make any it didn't make at the end of the day it didn't make any grandiose proclamations about how this is actually going to play out. Now they did say in fairness to the court that the Federal Reserve is different than other agencies like the NCUA
True.
because it's supposed to be more independent, but depending on how high a standard bar is or how low a bar is
Hmm.
for that four core standard, it's going to be extremely easy or difficult to remove board members in the future. And if the end result of this case is that the board member in question can be removed, but only after there's sufficient evidence,
Hmm.
okay, and the court's not going to second guess that, then what you have is the same practical result, which is a Federal Reserve, which is more, which is going to have to be more sensitive to political concerns
Yeah.
than it otherwise has to be in the past. So really, what I find is interesting about that case, in the short term, you get the first headline, okay, which is court upheld Federal Reserve independence.
Hmm.
But then as people read the case, I'm curious about what the impact of that's going to be on the stock market. I'm curious what the impact is going to be on futures,
Yeah.
because basically what they said was, we're going to kick this down the road until we have a better record to make a decision on.
Yeah.
So if people are looking for a real strong holding that says what they did here didn't constitute cause and wouldn't under any circumstances because it was outside of, they were accusing him of something that occurred outside the times he was a board member.
Hmm.
If they were looking to put this whole thing to rest, that didn't happen. So it is going
Right.
to be as interesting to see how big an impact that has. It also demonstrates another thing now. Okay. So that's another key thing about that. And then
Okay.
a third thing about this is in making the decision about independent agencies in about independent agencies and
Hmm.
in upholding removal of the FTC board members. Okay, the court made it quite clear that it was saving for another day any attempt to delineate when executive power ends and when the powers of the other two branches, congressional and judicial, begin.
Hmm.
It did strongly indicate, however, that to the extent that an agency is engaging in judicial activity or quasi-judicial activity, that probably is outside the scope of this decision, and they can do that. It also gets in my mind, well, if I'm an agency, for instance, and all I do is make rules and I don't enforce those rules or have the power to enforce them, because remember, um, does that mean that the agency can make rules because they like legislation, not executive? Now, that's an extreme example, but my
Sure.
point is that at the very least, this decision, while what I said at the beginning is true with regard to the impact of NCUA, don't fool yourself. You and I are going to be talking about the limits of executive powers for years to come, because there's going to have to be case after case starting to delineate when
Yeah.
executive power ends and everyone else's powers begin.
Okay, a last couple of quick questions here because I know Henry, you have meetings coming up, and it's just been
Yes.
a truly busy day. But I want to ask, do you think with this decision now, again, you've said your thoughts about the Harper Otsuka case, which seems to be widely believed that this is the end.
Yeah.
Nobody really sees a path forward yet for that. So my question is, do you believe that we are headed back to some kind of normalcy with a three-person board? Now, I will say this. Chairman Hauptman just said, what was it, last week at the board meeting, the rare board meeting we've had lately, that he believed we would return to normalcy by December 2027.
Yeah.
So that seemed like a long way. So I would have like, where are you at in your head with, do you think we're going to get back to a three-person board?
Well, you and I picked up on the same thing, which is that first of all, he was really heads and bets in terms of really think this when he thinks this is going to end up. But based on this decision report, you really have an incentive to fill as many positions quickly as possible. So I think you will get quick um, action on the existing nomination, which has already been the hearing was already held, the confirmation hearing was already held the other day,
Yep.
and then I do think based on this decision, you might see those other two positions filled more quickly than I would have guessed,
Okay.
um, even a couple of days ago. Now, the interesting thing about that is, I still say there's an issue out there at the end of the day, which is what power did not just NCUA, but any independent agency have to have single individuals make pretend as if they were a quorum for an entire board. And I still
Yeah.
think that is an issue that's going to be out there. And it's going to be another reason why you're going to see these positions filled. So we don't even have to address that issue.
Can I say, make one kind of editorial comment that I
Yeah.
don't get to say often because of the position that we're in? But I feel like this consolidation of power um, is truly is a bit detrimental to the cooperative nature and values that this industry says they believe in and that we are founded upon. And I don't know what to think about that. I don't know where that sits in my head yet with how the industry reacts or doesn't react to this. You know, are we a cooperative industry run by a independent and, somehow democratic agency? I don't know anymore. That's my big dilemma.
I agree with you. And if you remember, Michael, when you started talking about this even more than a year ago now, maybe 2 years ago,
Yeah.
I've been a bit about, and I'll be the first to admit, this is an opinion of one. It's very much an outcast opinion for which I have got a pushback on. But
Mm.
I think as the new normal plays out, I do think there's going to be a question of why do you even have an NCUA? Because my point is that if your leaders are appointed by the same president across the
Mhm.
board, OCC, FDIC, NCUA, then it seems to me it's a really strong argument to be, well, they have to reach the same conclusions and they're subject to the same people. And then why do we have a separate agency for the NCUA, particularly if we get someone in another conservative who says, you know what, we want to cut back. So, with the caveat that that is a opinion of one, I do believe that ultimately this is going to harm the industry. And I also think this that with the independent agency framework, you had the ability to get people within NCUA who understood the industry, who had experience with the agency,
Hmm.
and who understood credit unions. Now, I think you're going to see less and less of those people. I think you're going to have more and more of those people coming from the Hill, coming from agencies, coming from,
Yeah.
and that's fine, that's inevitable. But are these people going to have the level of background and skill we want for the operational aspects of
Hmm.
what we do? And that's going to be one of the interesting challenges as well.
Yeah, and we did put that question to America's credit unions this morning. I haven't heard from DCUC, but America's credit unions said they don't really see a path to consolidation to, all be under his treasury yet. But they said they know people talk about that, but they're getting zero signal on the Hill or from the administration that that could happen. Now,
And that
we
might,
still
don't get me wrong,
question
I'm
that
not,
that still could happen. That's what
and
we're
my question for that would be, at what point does it become a distinction without a difference? In other
yeah,
words,
agree,
even if
agree.
that's true,
Yeah.
okay, even if there's no desire to consolidate the NCUA, because why put up with the political hassle?
Yeah.
If you have the same leadership, we are responding to the same leadership,
Hmm.
then are we going to end up with a situation, particularly for large credit unions, where it becomes a distinction without a difference in terms of what regulations they are subject to?
Yeah. Again, Henry Meier, everybody, this is Henry Meier, Esquire, from the law office of Henry Meier. Henry, is always a pleasure. I do appreciate your mind and your thoughts behind all of this. We're going to keep in touch as we have for the past years and years going on. Any other thing you want to mention before we need to head out?
I like I said, I think there's nothing surprising about the decision regarding independent agencies, and I'd be really
Mhm.
surprised if what I will say is this though. If I wanted to be a total if I was asked by they have an ex, and I understand why they wouldn't, but
Mhm.
if Chairman Harper said, you know, Henry, why don't you write a brief saying why, based on the Supreme Court's decision, I should get my job back? The only avenue I can see, and it's a losing argument, is by the way, the court that this case on the FTC stands for the principle that executive power belongs to the executive. Well, I'm not exercising executive power. I am a rulemaking entity, and my power is more analogous to congressional rulemaking than it is to executive implementation of the law. That's the argument I would make. That's the only avenue I see. It's going to be a loser argument, and at the end of the day, um, we're going to have a whole new NCUA. Now, I will say this: a second thing to keep in mind is, let's see what happens to the stock market in the coming days, and I mean
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
because I think the initial blush of this decision dealing with the Federal Reserve is going to be, oh, gee, maybe it was a little different than we thought.
Yeah, the ripple effects, everybody, of Trump v. Slaughter and the decision handed down this morning by the Supreme Court, 6-3, I believe,
Yeah.
was the final vote there by the justices. The ripple effects of that decision have yet to be felt. And
Yep.
years down the road, we don't know exactly. But right now, we're dealing with this first wave. And Henry Meyer, always a pleasure. Everybody, stay tuned to CU Times. Connect with Henry if you'd like. He's a heck of a person to know. And again, you all take care of yourselves. We're going to keep analyzing and reporting on this very big story.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you.